All right. Are you able to see that?
I
Okay.
am.
All
Thank
right.
you.
Well, let's dive in. So, a pleasure to have the chance to talk with you about Glen Helen. The first 6 months, we are, on one hand, a nature preserve that's been in place for 90 years,
Mhm.
and a friends group that has been the donors, the advocates, and the volunteers in support of Glen Helen for for 60 years. Uh, but as circumstances have come to pass, for the past 6 months, the Glen Helen Association, the organization has long been that supporting organization, has stepped into the role as the owner, the operator, the governing board of Glen Helen, all within a global pandemic that forced the shutdown of all of our educational programs, and nearly all of the programs that we rely on to generate the revenue that it takes to operate the preserve. So this is our story on how we've navigated that, and ultimately why we feel great promise for the future of the Glen. So let's take stock a little bit. The presentation ordinarily would have started with our board president, Bethany Gray,
Yeah.
who wanted to acknowledge the many people, volunteers, board members, donors, and staff who stepped up and have gotten us as far as we have. And if she were here today, she'd be saying that with great eloquence. Instead, it's left to me to muddle through. Um, let's take stock of 2020, and we get into this well aware that um, we are not the only organization and the only people to have been
Right.
heavily impacted by 2020 and the coronavirus pandemic, and so we go in humbly knowing uh, that the challenges that we felt were replicated around the region and the world. But some of the circumstances that Glen Helen has navigated were unique to us and certainly intertwined with the pandemic. So before the early in the pandemic, this is a picture from almost exactly a year ago. As the pandemic hit, we were no longer able to operate our outdoor school programs, no longer able to invite schools to the preserve. It was unsafe to keep buildings open, and all of the sources of operating revenue instantly dried up.
Mm.
Um, we, uh, as a result of that, Antioch College, which we had long been a part of, opted to furlough nearly all of the staff of the Glen, and public access to the preserve was closed. We did not know how long that closure would last. It ultimately lasted nearly 6 months. Um, uh, it was a curious time for the preserve because really, probably never in the history of the Glen as a parcel of land, even going back to the period before Antioch College took ownership of it, there was never a time when public access to this land was closed. Um,
Mm.
so
Mm.
it was a unique circumstance for the land, as well as being a really challenging time for us working to see that this land could continue as a place of connection to the environment and ecological learning and all of the other environmental work that we do.
Mm.
Um, lots of coverage about the closure. Yellow Springs News reported on it frequently and in depth, but coverage spanned the region. And looking back at that time now, it's important for us to remember that while we had a happy outcome,
Mhm.
we were uh, staggeringly close to losing the Glen. We were very close to getting to the point where there was not going to be a future for the preserve as a place with public access, with environmental learning programs, with the attributes that the Yellow Springs community and the broader region have come to think of as um, um, a normal and ongoing and ever present feature of our community.
Mm.
But while all this was going on, Antioch College and the Glen Helen Association were quietly working behind the scenes to finalize an agreement.
Mm. Mhm.
Um, one of the things that I think was interesting to us, very few people were in the Glen, were allowed to be in the Glen during the time that it was closed. Just our ranger staff were in there monitoring trails, doing necessary work to manage invasive species as much as they were able. And one of the things that they observed was all of the ways in which nature was starting to take over on places that previously are worn smooth by regular human
Yeah.
contact. So this slide of the grotto of the Yellow Spring shows kind of plant growth all around the spring. Go down there today and you'll see, the people are exploring that area, and that green that you see in the slide from last year is not present now. Um, deer are ubiquitous anyway, but they were particularly bold last year
Oh.
because they just weren't running into people on the trails. Um, in our waterways, similarly, like this shot of the Birch Creek corridor,
Yeah.
mosses and greenery growing in places where folks are, to protect the resource, folks are not permitted to walk in the streams. And last year, because the preserve was closed,
Mhm.
it made it so that folks who would otherwise be exploring, hopping over the fences and so on, weren't there. And um, and you see the difference in terms of the will of the land to bounce back.
Yeah.
Um,
Wow.
so on one hand, it was a hard time, and on the other hand, it gave the land a little bit of time to rest and recover.
Yeah.
So in the summer, finally, we were able to announce an agreement in terms between Antioch College and the Glen Helen Association. That was finalized on September 4th,
Mhm.
2020. The details of that transaction were widely reported, but in brief, Glen Helen Association agreed to bring $2.5 million to the table to purchase Glen Helen, all of its assets, the right to acquire its staff, all of its programs, to purchase all of that from Antioch College, and in doing so, to shoulder the obligation and the expenses of maintaining the preserve and continuing to fulfill the mission of the organization. Um, so the details of the money side of things were, $500,000 up front, another $500,000 in mortgage payments over 10 years, and the remainder as a balloon payment in 10 years. When we finalized that transaction, the mayor of Yellow Springs, Pam Conine, who's in the center of this picture in the yellow shirt, presented us with a certificate of recognition for achieving this accomplishment and for reopening Glen Helen to the public. Seen in this picture, I'm next to Pam on, I guess this would be on to her left as we look at the photo, but also in the photo are the 5 members of the Glen Helen Association board who served as the negotiating committee between the Glen Helen Association and Antioch College, and then of course one of their dogs.
Right. They gotta have the dog, right?
Absolutely. Since the preserve reopened, and we reopened on September 9th, 2020, one of the things that we've come to realize was there was a pent-up desire for people to return to the preserve, to get out in nature, and one of the things that we became aware of along the way that maybe we should have anticipated, but honestly we didn't, is how important access to nature is for folks as they work to psychologically and socially claw themselves out of this pandemic. That we came to realize that part of people's pandemic recovery plan is spend time in the Glen, spend access in nature, and that during this time when there's so many things that people cannot do and cannot safely engage in, that one of the ways that they can connect with themselves as humans and connect with others in a physically distant manner is to be outside and be in nature. So we have never seen the Glen as popular as it's been over the past handful of months since we reopened. Any day that you get out into the Glen, you will see our parking lot is full when it's nice out. People are out on the trails. Families are exploring nature, and it feels really deeply, profoundly good to know that we're offering that connection to nature to the community. Some of these folks who you may recognize are Yellow Springers out exploring the Glen. One of the more interesting visits that happened over the past year was David Letterman came to Yellow Springs. This was widely reported for an episode of his Netflix program. My next guest needs no introduction.
Right.
He interviewed Dave Chappelle, and the entire episode was in many respects a love letter to Yellow Springs. They walked the Glen, explored the Glen, talked about the place and its history and its impact. Dave Chappelle advised David Letterman, well, they say if you drink from the water of the Yellow Spring, that you'll always return. And David Letterman replied, and I'm paraphrasing here, return, I'm buying property here. As far as we know, that has not yet come to pass, but we were honored to host such luminary figures in the
Mhm.
Glen. Um,
Oh, yeah.
I, I want to turn now to how we are working to ensure that we're able to sustain the Glen. The board recognized that on one hand we'd agreed to a purchase price, but we hadn't paid for it.
Right.
And we didn't have $2.5 million in the bank to cover the cost, and the board was aware that it was going to be a heavy lift to pay for the Glen, to secure the funds for its ongoing operation, and to claw ourselves out of many, many years of deferred maintenance,
Mhm.
so that we could be sure that the trails are safe to walk, that buildings are safe to offer programs, and that programs that have been discontinued since the start of the pandemic would be able to return and continue to offer life-shaping environmental learning to children from around the region. So the board planned a $3.5 million campaign aimed at, because everyone loves alliteration, the three P's: the
Mhm.
purchase, the preserve, and the programs. And I'll talk briefly about each of those.
Awesome.
Um, so this, and I won't talk extensively about this, but slide, but it breaks down kind of about a third of the campaign was dedicated to each of those three P's. So I've already talked about the terms of the purchase. Again, about a third of the capital campaign is designed to raise the funds to secure um, uh, the land itself. And on one hand, we're confident that we're going to get there. On
Yeah.
the other hand, I need to call out, if we don't get there, we lose it.
Yeah.
So it's a weighty obligation. And we take it seriously. And we're grateful for the support that people have given us so far, and will be giving us soon, and that is going to enable us to succeed in that part of the campaign. Um, the um, the next component is the preserve, and we've identified a number of components that we wanted to take on to ensure the health of the preserve,
Mhm.
ensure for its ongoing care, and ease public access to the preserve. I'll highlight a few of those.
Mhm.
Folks who've been in Yellow Springs for a long time may recall that we used to have a parking area that was off of Ohio State Route 343, quite close to the Yellow Spring. There were lots of reasons why it was a good idea to close that lot. It was really close to ecologically significant areas, and it was in an area that was kind of so far back in the woods that it had persistent pressure from vandals that would break into people's cars when they walked off on the trail. So it made sense to close that lot.
Mhm.
But what we lost when we did that is, for folks with limited mobility, it meant that there was really no good way for them to access Glen Helen anymore.
Right.
And so we've been aware of that. We've also been aware that our main parking area off of State Route, off of Corey Street, is simply not large enough to accommodate the demand for community members and for folks coming from out of town to explore Yellow Springs and the Glen. So part of what we intend to do is, off of State Route 343. If you look, this is a, a image done by landscape architects, but if you look carefully, you can see it's on top of a photo of
Yeah.
the Glen. So right at the top, you can see State Route 343, and you
Mhm.
can barely make out the double yellow line in the center of it.
Yeah.
And then heading down the left side of the photo, you can see another gray line. That's the entrance drive into the Outdoor Education Center.
Oh,
Part
interesting.
of part of our plan is to build additional parking area, including a restroom that people will be able to access right off of State Route 343. If a bike path is ultimately built between Yellow Springs and Clifton, this would be a feature along that bike path.
Mhm.
And folks parking in here would have near level access to be able to get to the Yellow Spring, to the Cascades of Birch Creek, to the Raptor Center, all the way, if they want to, all the way down to the Pine Forest. It really opens up the east side of Glen Helen to folks who aren't able to tackle the heavy stairs that are an obligatory feature of
Right.
the west side of the Glen.
Mhm.
We'd also be looking to install new bridges and boardwalks in places where springs cross the trail, where we have persistent flooding,
Mhm.
which part of that is to protect to make it easier for people to walk there, and
Right.
part of it is to protect the environment, because when you have wet spots, the general tendency of folks is to try and walk outside that wet spot, and you end up kind of expanding, inch by inch and foot by foot. The trails get wider and wider and wider, and every time people do that, they're walking over the natural habitats, and stepping across wildflowers and so on. So that's another component of it. We've designated a bunch of money for a systematic review of hazard trees in the Glen. Some number of years ago, we calculated that 13% of the trees in the Glen were ash trees.
Uh,
Nearly all
mhm.
of our white ash and green ash trees have been killed by the emerald ash borer.
Yeah.
Many of those are near trails. They're standing dead trees. They tend to snap 20 to 30 feet up with
Oh.
limited warning.
Mhm.
Um, and uh, so part of what we want to do with the funds that we raise from this capital campaign is to be able to go in and make sure that that to the extent possible, you can never, we don't want to cut down every dead tree.
Right.
um,
Right.
but we want to ensure that trees that seem reasonably likely to fall across buildings, power lines, cars, trails, that we want to make sure that those are limbed or cut in such a way that minimizes the likelihood that they will cause harm to people or property. We also have budgeted a fair
Mhm.
amount for site restoration. The biggest example of that is that we intend to demolish the Antioch College power plant and to
Ooh.
restore the spring-fed wetland that it is built on the site of.
Oh,
Um,
interesting.
uh, we
Mhm.
we're aware that the power plant is a significant vector for attractive vandalism. It's actually bringing people to Yellow Springs for the purpose of exploring the power plant, tagging it, and
Mhm.
it's an area with risk of falls, broken glass, friable asbestos. Uh, it's not a safe facility, and while most people are heeding our no trespassing signage, I'm loath to acknowledge that not everyone does, and because the power plant is connected to the hydrology of the Glen. Uh, Pollutants coming off of the power plant can make their way through our stream system into the Glen, into the Little Miami, potentially into the water supply for not just the village, but all of the communities downstream along the Little Miami and so on. So we're working to secure the funds to remove that and to restore the wetland that's there to its its full potential as an ecological resource. Last thing on the preserve is that we're working to bring back land management staffing. Part of the bottleneck that we went through for the transaction meant that we needed to shed, unfortunately, many of the staff that do the daily work of caring for the Glen and operating its programs. So since February of last year, we have not had a land manager, and we're presently working to bring that position back. We're actually conducting interviews over the current period, and we're hoping to have somebody working full time, taking care of the trail system and the ecology of the preserve. Next up, the programs. I should say, have operated the region's longest running residential environmental learning program. When the Outdoor Education Center at Glen Helen started in 1956, there were residential environmental learning programs on the West Coast, on the East Coast, and nothing in between. Glen Helen was a pioneer in that field. Many of the residential environmental learning programs around the country, and I can say this without hyperbole, around the world, were modeled after the programs that were developed here. And we've never needed to take a pause on operating our programs until this past year. So part of what we're trying to accomplish with the campaign is reestablish those environmental learning programs. This is a picture that kind of shows how long that program's been running. This is right off State Route 343, and the sign is still there. It's the wording's been updated a little bit, but you can see in the distance the towers of Antioch Hall on the college campus. Now, if you went there today, you'll see the sign, but you won't see those towers because there's a forest that gets in between them. You can't even tell that there's buildings in the distance. That's amazing. A lot of growth in habitat over the last 65 years. Here's a program of kids in the early 1960s having an amazing experience out in nature. And here's a more recent experience of kids having an amazing, dare I say, life-shaping experience out in nature. It's urgent for us to get our ducks in a row to bring that program back. We know what a difference it makes in kids' lives, and are well aware that for many of the kids that come here, and nearly 3,000 children a year do come to the Glen Helen Outdoor Education Center, for many of them, this is going to be the most memorable week of their school career.
Yep.
The other thing that bringing back that program allows us to accomplish is it's not just about providing a great week of environmental learning for kids. It's also about training the next generation of environmental educators. We have, since 1956, been engaging college students and recent college graduates as naturalist interns. This is a cohort of interns from a few years back. And the folks that have been through our program, over 1,000 of them now. Actually, I'm one of the alumni of the Naturalist Intern Program, are around the world working in national parks and college universities and many other settings, Many of them have stayed in environmental fields. Many of them have stayed in education, and part of bringing back our environmental learning programs is bringing back uh, our training of environmental educators. One of the things that we're doing now is renovating facilities that'll make the restart of programs possible. I wish I actually had a newer slide of this. This is one of our 3 houses for our naturalists. This is the Mercer Farmhouse. Some folks might recognize it off of State Route 343. We're in the middle of a top to bottom, base of the foundation to tip of the chimney renovation of this, so that when the stars align, that we're able to bring back programs, we'll have a house that naturalists can live in that has absolutely 0 skunks also living in it, which is not what we could say before we started renovating it.
Gotcha. Wow.
We're working in this is the lodge building at the Outdoor Education Center. We're working on things that are basic code compliance for our spaces, addressing things like indoor air quality. The lodge has a commercial kitchen that we've been required to make some substantial improvements to, simply for the purpose of passing building codes, health codes, and making sure that we have a space that's suitable for serving children. And working in our student dormitories. We have 3 student dormitories. Cumulatively, we're able to serve 100 kids at a time, and have a variety of things that we need to tackle in our dorms before we'll be able to again offer residential programs. Again, we're attending to things like making sure we've got fresh mattresses and bunk beds that have nooks and don't have any nooks and crannies that bed bugs can live in, and attending to indoor air quality, which has meant for the first time that in all 3 of our dormitories we've added air conditioning to lower the indoor humidity of the buildings and keep the air fresh. Not interested in making it chilly in the middle of the summer, just interested in making sure that when kids go into the space they're getting breathable air. I was looking for a program or for a photo to illustrate the need to bring back program staff, and this one might be a little bit of a shoehorn fit, but bear with me on it.
Okay. Sure.
I was trying to say, and these are elephant skis, one of the cooperative activities at the Outdoor Education Center. And the idea is they're too heavy to move on your own, so you need a bunch of people to walk with them. But if you have a bunch of people and you're not coordinated, then you can't do it. So you need this combination of a whole group of people coordinated with one another to make things work. And such is the case for our program staff. We have a heavy lift to operate the environmental learning programs, restart Trailside Museum, engage volunteers, work with donors to win the philanthropic investments that'll make it possible for the Glen to continue. All of that is far beyond the reach of our current team, and so part of what's in the capital campaign is seed funding to bring back some of the core staff that, working together, will enable us to restart programs and ensure that we've got enough resources to continue to operate and to engage the public. We're on our way. We've passed now the $1.5 million mark on the capital campaign, which shows the wonderful generosity of members of our community. It also shows how far we still have to go. Um, I'm gonna go through these things pretty quickly, but I want to illustrate kind of what we've been working on
Yeah.
over the last few days while we've been open. So I mentioned restarting the Outdoor Education Center. Um, we are diving in now with the first step of restarting the programs there. We are running 8 weeks, planning 8 weeks of our summer eco camp. Uh, because of our work on the dormitories and the pandemic, these are only going to be day programs
Mhm.
this year, and instantly, as soon as we put them out online, they were 2/3 of the way full.
Wow. Yep.
Uh, it's a real sign of I think pent up demand for kids and
Yeah.
parents.
Parents
uh,
want a break.
yeah, yeah. People absolutely want a break, but also that idea of that it's an opportunity for kids to get back in nature, for kids to be kids, for kids to spend some time with one another in engaged in fun and environmental learning. Um, and we've got camps that start from kids as young as 5 years old,
Oh, nice.
and looking forward to seeing welcoming kids again starting June 7th.
Nice.
Yeah.
Okay.
We've been rolling out public programs. Presently, we're not, all of our buildings remain closed. They'll be closed for the foreseeable future. But we are doing outdoor public programs. Each one has a size limit of 10 people. And it's been good to get folks out in the Glen. I've been leading a monthly bird walk like I do for years, and it's always a lot of fun to explore the trail. This is a slightly older picture, so maybe not the best example, but on those programs, uh, everyone's masked. We maintain physical distancing from one another, and it's just been good to explore the Glen and engage with folks again. Our Raptor Center has been up and running this whole time, and once the Glen reopened, people are able to come by the Raptor Center, see the birds there,
Mhm.
and we've done even some programs, again, small numbers of people, but kind of a house call program that we've been fond of, where our Raptor Center team will bring a bird to folks' houses, and they'll have a program in the front yard or the backyard for a little bit of time with them, their neighbors, their friends, always small groups, masked, and it's a chance for us to connect with folks and
Yeah.
bring in some of the revenue that's necessary for keeping the program going. We also engaged in the biggest construction project at the Raptor Center that we've done in years, all during the thick of the pandemic.
Wow.
The rehabilitation cages at the center had been the there's no nice way to put it. They were terrible. They were absolutely falling apart. It was impossible to keep um, raccoons out of the cages, which then put the birds at risks.
Yeah.
The ceilings were collapsing. I mean, they were wooden cages turning back into dirt.
Yeah. Gotcha.
um, and over the course of 2020, right amid the pandemic, with support from the Dayton Foundation, the Nippert Foundation, other individual donors, we fully rebuilt the rehabilitation cages. Here's a picture of those under construction.
Wow.
9 new enclosures, and
Cool.
the minute that those were finished last spring, we started to put rehabilitating birds in them. The
Mhm.
cages are going to substantially increase our ability to take care of rehabilitating wildlife,
Nice.
hopefully improve the outcomes for those hawks and owls and
Hmm.
falcons that we bring in. And one thing that we haven't finished yet, but we're really excited about, is we'll be installing a camera system in there that'll let us keep track of those birds, and over our website, let others check in and see the birds in their enclosures as we're working to rehabilitate them. We're really excited to be able to roll that out as well. And we've been doing ongoing work in land stewardship, sometimes with volunteer activities. Folks mask up, come out and help us cut honeysuckle and other invasive species. Let me take a minute and kind of take you through the finances, and then I think we're about wrapped up.
Okay.
So this is a section of the program that our finance director Tom Clevenger presented, and I'm not going to do the job that he did, but I'm going to try. So he advised that, if someone were to approach him and ask for advice on starting a new nonprofit in Yellow Springs that would have a heavy public presence and substantial fixed expenditures, his advice would be don't. Starting a nonprofit of any size is a difficult venture in the best of times. Starting and managing a complex nonprofit with immediate cash requirements and a saturated market during a global pandemic would be borderline impossible. Thankfully, the Glen Helen Association was already an established entity with a strong donor base and a solid enough cash position to make operations after acquisitions feasible. We also had familiarity with what we were getting into.
Yeah.
There were many firsts for the association in this process that would have created strategic challenges. The association had been primarily volunteer operated and had never hired full-time staff. Liability coverage had to be established, not just for the land and buildings, but for tens of thousands of visitors, for students at Outdoor Education Center, for staff and volunteers. These would not be one and done costs. They were expenses that the association was agreeing to take on into perpetuity.
Mm-hmm.
And while this wasn't unique to our organization, COVID created additional financial challenges by limiting the ways that we could generate revenue for the preserve. Our outdoor education school program, our eco camps were indefinitely suspended. At the time, we had no idea how long they would be suspended for, anywhere from months to forever.
Right.
There was no way to hold in-person fundraisers like Who Cooks for You, our Raptor Center event, which in years past would have fundraised almost all of the Raptor Center's operating costs. Our buildings were closed to the public, so no facility rentals or in-person sales at our nature shop. None of those were an option either. Given the uncertainty of when anything would return to normal, the initial operating budget was established by what we thought we could raise through contributions, visitor fees, and tenant rentals. All of these sources had a level of uncertainty given the economic impact of the pandemic.
Right.
Would there be enough people in a position to give to the Glen, renew their membership? If we were running a capital campaign, will that limit donors to our annual campaign? Will people feel safe coming out to the Glen? That one was answered in short order already. Our initial operating budget showed the association having a cash deficit of around $40,000. Again, if the association is not already an established organization with cash reserves on hand, running in the red is not something a new nonprofit can typically do for many reasons. But with an eye on the future and cash on hand, the board approved that budget. We're halfway through the budget. Actually, now we're
Mm.
3/4 of the way through the budget. We still have to settle out on the terms. So it'd be premature. It would be premature to share kind of detailed financial documents in that setting. But I want to highlight the contributed and earned revenue that we've raised or collected to date. We have so far well exceeded our initial projections with this support, and are on track actually to be revenue positive at the end of the fiscal year instead of dipping into cash reserves. Fingers crossed. So
May,
you
may
can,
I, may I interrupt you real quickly?
of
Can you tell
course,
me what your fiscal year is?
yeah, our fiscal year runs July 1st through June 30th.
Okay, thank you.
And you can see here that at this point this year that we had budgeted $151,000 in contributions. We are now at this point at 267,000. That's wonderful.
Yeah, it is.
We'd budgeted 58,000 in memberships. We're now at 83. Again, wow, thank you. And we budgeted $34,000 in collections at our parking area, and that figure stands at 48,000. Think about that. For most of a good fraction of the fiscal year, we weren't even open to the public, so weren't even able to start welcoming people to the Glen and to the parking area until the middle of September, and then we went into winter. So really, really pleased that, one, that we're able to serve the community, and two, that our community recognizes what the Glen brings, and have stepped up their support. So hey, some fun facts, and when we say fun facts, we mean it. Our projections for the annual fund have been exceeded by over $110,000. 438 folks have signed on as new donors to the Glen since the start of the fiscal year, and we now stand at 1,980 members to the Glen Helen Association. We're really pleased to see not just new donors to that group, but folks who stepped away for a year or 2 or 10, who've come back to renew their support. That is how we will succeed as an organization, with the support of everybody who cares about the Glen and the work that we do, and knows that their support will make a difference for us. Last bit, looking ahead, I mentioned Eco Camp starting June 7th. We're thrilled for that.
Yeah.
We'll be hiring our land management staff, ramping up our trail maintenance, habitat restoration work. Hopefully before long, we'll be able to reopen buildings. We have no specific plans for when we'll be able to do that. We're particularly, this building and Trailside Museum, which are largely staffed by a combination of staff and volunteers. We want to make sure that we're not putting our staff and volunteers in harm's way, that we're not putting the public in harm's way by way of reopening. And once we can do so safely, with respectable protocols for keeping people safe and keeping the building clean, we want to do that. Same is true for Trailside Museum. And that's my chance to say again, we wouldn't be here today without the support of the thousands of people who've stepped in and agreed that the Glen is worth saving, that have invested in the work we're doing now and invested in the future through our capital campaign. And we're well aware that we have a long way to go, But we're super super excited to be on this path.